So there's not much talk about the tree of life. It's mostly just to talk about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So how does the second tree come into it? What can we read into that?
So what's interesting, another thing that I think there's a common misconception about this story is that once they eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they're banned from the Garden of Eden, right? And so they're banned. Big scary angel, whatever you want to call him, is put in place. Fiery sword. You're not getting in. And there's this misconception that again that it was this like this act of, I don't know if you would call it oppression or tyranny, but this idea that like it was an act of unkindness that the father would remove them from this perfect paradise that he had created for them. When in reality, what was happening it wasn't an act of unkindness, it was an extreme act of kindness. Because the reality is that humans were now living in this corrupted state, and he knew that we were needing to be redeemed from that. And so he needed to cut them off from having access to the tree of life, because having access to the tree of life may have locked us into this state of living in this corrupted state of existence and being. And so in his act of kindness, he removed them from the tree of life, and then, set in motion his plans that would eventually lead to, Christ coming and offering a way for us to be redeemed and to become, righteous, which righteousness is a huge topic in and of itself. But one of the meanings of the Greek word dikaiosune, it's where we get righteousness. It means to be as one ought to be. And so through Christ, we're actually redeemed and we're restored into a people and just a state of existence and being that is more in alignment, in some ways with regard to who we ought to be, but at the very least with the potential to become who we ought to be.
With the Garden of Eden, there are several schools of thought about what it actually was and what it represented. Some say it was a real physical place and we can locate it east side of Turkey. Another group of people say that no, no, it wasn't actual physical place. It's a psychological state that humans were in before they realized about good and evil and have subsequently lived their natures since. Where do you fall on that when you read into it and the context behind
Again, with reading like ancient, ancient literature, we just have to understand that there's going to be a level of mystery around this. And that's just something that we're just gonna have to accept. Now, personally, I do tend, I'm not opposed to thinking that it was a real physical place with real physical people. But again, like people in the ancient world, they loved symbolism and they loved, this they thought differently than we do, and they wrote differently and spoke differently. And so again, I do tend to lean towards that. I think it was a physical place. But then again, I don't think I think you could build a strong case that Adam and Eve weren't the only people, that they were an archetype of what the Lord intended for people to become and do. But, you read just beyond the story of the fall and you get into Genesis, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you realize that like uh there's just a lot of language and a lot of things that imply that there were already people and civilizations um living, uh, for Cain to be cast out, and he starts this civilization, and there's just, you read the story and there's just a lot of language that implies that they were real people in a real place, but they weren't the only ones, likely. But again, you can find people who can build really uh people can make good cases for a lot of different ways to interpret, this ancient literature. And so I do tend to think that, yeah, I think it was a physical place, but there's just a lot of mystery around that, and so I think we just have to be okay with that to a degree.